Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on this bill and to commend the government's determination to bring back the Australian Building and Construction Commission. Regrettably, corruption, lawlessness, standover tactics, bullying and intimidation are commonplace in the Australian construction industry. And before I speak about this bill and why this bill is so important, I want to address some comments made by the previous member, the member for Newcastle, and convey in no uncertain terms my disgust at the comments made by the member for Newcastle in relation to the deaths of workers on Australian construction sites. It is appalling that she has invoked the terrible deaths of men and women who have died on Australian construction sites in her argument. In no way does anyone in this House, and I could even see the faces of other members opposite who I don't think were particularly impressed with her comments, would ever suggest that full compliance with occupational health and safety and the highest standards of safety, full compliance with the law on Australian construction sites is not absolutely vital. And for the member for Newcastle to use a shabby, pathetic argument not only discredits her but discredits her party. And if she cared about bringing some integrity to this parliament, she would withdraw those comments. Mr Deputy Speaker, in an industry which employs more than 1 million Australians directly, the conduct on Australian building and construction sites has had a very deep impact on the Australian economy, on the cost of doing business, on the cost of construction, particularly in my home state of Victoria, and on jobs across this nation. This is not about attacking unions. This is not about attacking workers. This is what Labor wants Australians to believe. This is about ensuring that we have a lawful and efficient workplace in the construction sector. And frankly, if employers or businesses are engaging in any inappropriate conduct, then they should be held to account. Because an efficient, lawful workplace is vital for workers. Workers want to work in a place where there is peace and harmony. They do not want to be subjected to standover tactics. I can tell you, the victims in most cases are the workers. And we want to see a lawful environment for the Australian construction and building industry to prosper. Mr Deputy Speaker, when the ABCC was in place, it resulted in fewer days lost due to industrial action. It ensured a greater degree of confidence in our very important building and construction sector. It resulted in a 9% productivity growth in the construction industry and $7.5 billion in consumer savings. The ABCC was prepared to prosecute and punish company officials, anyone, in fact, including some union bosses, to address these issues of misconduct and unlawful behaviour. The construction industry provides many jobs for workers in small business, in large enterprises, for workers, for contractors. It's critical to a productive, prosperous and internationally competitive Australia. The Coalition Government recognises the importance of an industry that is vital to job creation and essential to Australia's economic and social well-being. The bill re-establishes the ABCC, a genuinely strong watchdog that will maintain the rule of law. This, Mr Deputy Speaker, protects workers as much as anyone else. It improves productivity, whether onshore or offshore, and it addresses many of the terrible stories that we've heard in the Royal Commission and, of course, the Royal Commission's final report. The bill prohibits unlawful industrial action by anyone, unlawful picketing, coercion and discrimination. The penalties are high enough to provide an effective deterrent and, of course, to return the particular worksite to one that respects the rule of law. A wide range of effective remedies, such as injunctions, will also be available to the ABCC and to address the particular unlawful behaviour. Mr Deputy Speaker, in my region there's been a couple of compelling examples, and it's clear that members opposite just want to put their head in the sand in terms of some of this systemic behaviour on Australian construction sites. There's a wonderful place in Geelong called Little Creatures Brewery, now a thriving business, but the Little Creatures Brewery went through hell and back to try and construct their particular operation. We saw in Geelong a violent dispute at the Little Creatures Brewery, where union picketers were accused in court documents of making throat-cutting gestures, threats to stomp heads in. Workers who wanted to get on with the work were being told that they were dead, and there was much shoving and kicking and punching of motor vehicles in what turned out to be an illegal picket. Perhaps, Mr Deputy Speaker, the best example of a terrible time that workers went through in my region, as well as a particular company, was Boral. Boral, which was of course working with Grocon, was put in the worst possible position by the CFMEU, which was effectively and illegally black banned by the CFMEU. The CFMEU ran a devastating campaign, which according to Boral cost it more than $20 million in damages. They were working on one of the biggest projects in our region, the Regional Rail Link, such a critical project for jobs, for productivity, though at the moment we can see under the state Labor government public transport is in a fair bit of crisis, but it was and remains a very important project. According to Boral's CEO Mike Kane, company trucks were stopped, its workers were intimidated, drivers were harassed, and every possible technique was used to try and shut Boral down because of its contracting with Grocon. On the 9th of July 2014, during a hearing before the Hayden Royal Commission, Boral's CEO Mike Kane said that the CFMEU were using cartel tactics, blackmail, intimidation, to try and wrest control of Melbourne's multi-billion-dollar construction industry. He said the union and the builders were conspiring to allow anti-competitive behaviour to flourish. Mr Kane said that during the hearing that CFMEU Victorian State Secretary John Setka had told his staff the union was at war with Grocon, warning that Boral had to toe the line and cut its ties with Grocon or face the consequences. Mr Kane gave evidence that Boral lost some $8 million in the preceding 19 months as long-term customers cancelled orders in order to avoid falling victim to the union's wrath. He said, and I quote, "I was roadkill. We were simply a bystander who happened to be in the way. When we didn't agree, we had to be punished as a lesson to other suppliers. This type of behaviour is the essence of the criminal conspiracy we are talking about." Mr Kane also pointed out that he was disappointed by the lack of action taken by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission after he complained to them about the black ban being imposed by his company. It took more than 2 years for the dispute to be resolved. In September 2015, the company finally settled with Boral. The CFMEU finally settled with Boral. The CFMEU agreed to pay Boral $4 million, as well as legal costs, which are expected to total some $9 million, and agreed to submit to a range of controls to ensure it would not interfere with the company's business over the next 3 years. I mean, this was an unbelievable, terrible time for an important company doing great work in Victoria, providing hundreds and hundreds of jobs, working on one of the biggest infrastructure projects of the time. And the law was not there to help Boral. The CEO, Mike Cain, went through hell and back. And Mr Deputy Speaker, throughout all that time, and I spoke about this case when the bill came before the Parliament last time, the Labor Party were completely silent. They were not prepared to stand up and say enough is enough. We won't tolerate this behaviour. We won't allow this unlawful behaviour to continue on Victorian building sites, which is hurting workers, which is hurting jobs, which is hurting productivity, and which of course is impacting on major infrastructure projects. It was deafening silence from the Labor Party, including of course the Leader of the Opposition. So of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, Borrell has welcomed the recommendations of the final report of the Royal Commission into trade union governance and corruption, and Mike Cain said together these reports are a comprehensive catalogue of rampant union abuses of the Australian legal system by serial recidivists. In relation to the CFMEU, I have to commend Mr Cain. He's been very brave in the way in which he's spoken out. Many other businesses and employers were too fearful and have been too fearful to speak out in fear of incurring the sort of wrath that Borrell has incurred. He said it's abundantly clear that the rule of law has been trampled on by an organisation that prides itself in taking the law into its own hands. He said that he was pleased with the seriousness of the CFMEU's continued the way in which the CFMEU's conduct had been dealt with, and he said there is a long-standing malignancy or disease within the CFMEU, and this has actually been something that's been acknowledged by former Prime Minister Bob Hawke, who's called for the CFMEU to be deregistered. But again, I say, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is not about any particular union. This is not about workers. This is about the conduct. If the CFMEU were prepared to comply with the law, if they were prepared to run their union in a lawful way, we would not be having this sort of discussion, and these sorts of terrible findings of the Royal Commission would have not, of course, come to light. So what our government is concerned about the conduct, and that's what we are concerned about. I visited, and I might just say, the Epworth Hospital in Geelong, a very large project in Geelong under construction, and I visited them a number of months ago and then again last week, and it's a great example of a project where there is wonderful industrial harmony, and there are many members of the CFMEU working on that project, and many members to whom I've spoken are also less than impressed with the conduct of CFMEU union bosses. That's the very point. They don't like it. They don't like being caught up in this. And I spoke to one and he said, "Oh, well, you're not very impressed with our union." I said, "No, we're all about jobs. We want to protect those jobs, but we want to make sure that you can work in a lawful workplace, and that is the key issue here." Mr Deputy Speaker, the bill, as I talk about, upholds and promotes respect for the rule of law and ensures respect for the rights of all building industry participants. It contains provisions to ensure that unlawful action, including unlawful industrial action, unlawful pickets, are dealt with appropriately. It provides effective means for investigating and enforcing the law. It certainly does much to change the lawless culture of the building and construction industry, and provides a range of higher penalties, which we believe are justified to try and get the construction industry back on its feet. I mean, at the moment in Victoria, the cost of construction in Victoria is running at about 30% higher than in other states, and we are seeing a crisis in infrastructure developments in Victoria. There is a huge loss of confidence because of the risks of doing business and embarking on these large projects in Victoria. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, I commend this bill to the House. I was once a member of a union. Unions do great work, and there are many wonderful members of unions right around this country, but we will not, as a government, tolerate this sort of behaviour in any work site, and that is why the passing of this bill is so vitally important.